Welcome back to the Cat's Tale. In this video, we'll be looking at perhaps the two most important concepts in the TCG, turn priority and dice advantage. In most popular TCGs, going first is a significant advantage, so the game has to provide some extra balancing factor to help the player that goes second. In Genius Invocation, there are advantages to going first, but there are also significant advantages to going second as well, to the point that often a deck would prefer to be going second. The reason for this is because of the rounds system in the game. Every time you take an action, you pass your turn and allow your opponent to act. Then they act and pass back to you. Once you can't take any more actions, you end your round and allow your opponent to take as many actions as they want. This is obviously extremely dangerous. If you end your round, you forfeit your right to do anything. It's as if you've frozen all your characters, discarded all your cards temporarily, and given your opponent unlimited free quick swaps. But this only applies if your opponent has enough dice to make use of the free actions. If you start your turn second, it's easier to end your turn second, which means your last turns in the round will happen after your opponent has finished acting. A deck like Cleave Vaporize quite likes to go second, and has several ways to threaten to kill a character on turn 1 if the opponent ends their turn first. You can see here that as soon as the opponent passes the turn, we know the kill on their character is guaranteed, with no way for them to respond. If both players used exactly the same number of actions each turn, then the player who started playing first would get to end their turn first every round. But this isn't how the game really plays out, thanks in part to cards such as Paimon, Vanarana, and Liban, which can effectively store dice from one round to the next. The advantage each of these cards give is that playing them provides a useful way to use dice on one round without spending an action, which can help you to gain turn priority. Then, on a future turn, they provide extra dice, allowing you to take more actions on that turn. This dice advantage makes it likely you'll get to act even after your opponent has ended their turn, without any danger now of them having any counterplay. Storing dice for a later turn can also be valuable in combination with effects that last a certain number of turns. For example, Bennett's Burst gets more value the more skills you can afford to use during the 2 turns it is active. So, letting your opponent end turn first can be an advantage if you have enough dice advantage to make use of the free turns. However, there is a big advantage to ending your turn first, which is that you then start first in the next round. Starting first is strong for a few reasons. It's extremely valuable on the final round of the game in particular, when often both players will have more than enough dice to use the skills needed to win the game, but are limited by the number of turns they have. Another advantage to starting a round first is that your opponent doesn't even get a chance to play any cards before you take your first action. They could have all the defensive cards in the world in hand, and it won't stop you from killing their character or making a game-winning play if you go first on that turn. So when you're closing out a game, going first becomes a massive advantage. If you want to end turn first without wasting your dice, you just need to spend your dice either on cards, which don't cost an action, or on skills that cost a larger number of dice, such as Nahida's 5-cost skill. So that's the theory. Let's see if we can jump in and apply it to some games. A quick example here of how using quick swap effects to gain turn priority can be useful. There's a lot going on in this game, but the key things to realise is our opponent has no dice left, so they're probably just ending their turn, especially with only one card in hand. And if they do that, Then our two summons will kill their Ganyu and their Kazuha at end of turn, so they'll be left with only their Raiden Shogun. Now their summons are also going to do a lot to us, but we can plan how it's going to happen and think about, okay, how can we end our turn in a way that we can then start next turn to immediately gain an advantage. So we have the ability here to use a quick swap, so we can swap without using our round. That's important because we don't want to let opponent end their turn first. We want to be able to go first next turn, because next turn is definitely going to be the last turn. So going first basically gives us a whole extra action to work with. Now if we end turn on Nahida, this is going to be killing our Nahida. This would be killing our Zhang Ling potentially, and then we'll be left with only our Raiden Shogun against theirs, which isn't really a winning situation. So we want to be able to swap so we can keep our key characters alive, and Zhang Ling's our most important character against his Raiden Shogun, so we can potentially trigger an overload reaction against that Electro Aura and do a lot of burst damage. So how are we going to actually engineer this so we can keep our Zhang Ling alive and go first next turn? Well, if I use my quick swap to Raiden Shogun, I have a spare die so I can just draw some cards. I can store up any other dice in my Vanrana. I could be using a normal attack here, but that's a whole waste of an action, and going first next turn is way more important than anything we could do with that. Use a food just to make the breakpoints work out. Any food would have worked really. We also had a Lotus Flower Crisp, which would have been useful if we'd done something slightly different. But here we go. We get some value out of our summons in turn. An opponent does quite a lot of damage with theirs, but critically we keep characters alive if we wanted to, and we get to go first. So this means these food cards left in our hand we can use as we want. In this case we don't need to play around Monster Resonance or anything. He can't kill both our characters here in one turn with whatever cards he's got. So I just do a little bit of critical damage here. This is especially important if they have something like Lotus Flower Crisp, but just a pizza in this case. And effectively on this last turn, because we got to go first, we get to use 2 turns before the end of the game, whereas the opponent only gets to use 1. And that means that we do get the chance to use our Zhang Ling here before the end of the game to win with a quick burst. Okay, let's look at how we can exploit turn priority here in a game with our Rainbow Nahida deck against opponents. It's a very similar deck, but based around the quicken reaction. Now we're going to want to start off just developing our Raiden summon, and opponent doing similarly wants to start developing a Yai summon for some Electro application. Now, after this, it's interesting that opponent then sorts to Nahida, planning probably to use Nahida's skill, because we can see they have 3 dice left over. So we have 2 real moves here. We can either swap to our Zhang Ling or stay on our Raiden. Now, if we swap to our Zhang Ling, then it's going to be Zhang Ling being hit by Nahida's skill and by the Yai summon at the end of the turn, and then potentially at the start of next turn by the skill again, which, if it deals damage to a character with Caesar Scanter, spreads them to all the other characters as well. So if that was happening to our Zhang Ling, then it's effectively spreading 5 Seeds of Scander the second time, so it's effectively a 7 damage skill for 3 dice. And we really do want to go to our Zhang Ling so we can get Zhang Ling's skill out, but maybe we don't have to do it straight away. So if we can't really afford to use her elemental skill on the same character there twice, because that's just absurd value for them, we want to be able to swap off the character that they use the elemental skill on right now. So what we can do is we can just stay on our Raiden, use our dice sufficiently not to swap, but to draw some cards and to play Liben. And then when an opponent uses their skill on our Raiden, sure, that's going to be a quicken reaction and some damage on our Raiden. But what we can do immediately on our second turn is, as we can gain the turn priority here in our second round, we can just swap off our Raiden, and that means instead of their Nahida's elemental skill applying to Caesar Scander to every one of our characters, it's going to only apply it to our active character. So after we roll for Pyro and Dendro dice, we just swap straight off since we have the turn priority to our Zhangling. Then after this skill, well, you can imagine if that was happening on our Raiden, then we'd have 2 Caesar Scander on all of our characters, and here there's only 2 on Zhangling and 1 on Raiden, which is obviously much less scary for us. And that was enabled by having turn priority and being able to engineer on our second round to swap off immediately. A quick and straightforward example of where turn priority is really important. So in this situation, ending the turn might not be your first instinct when we still have 7 dice left, but Zhongli's elemental burst that petrifies the target is really strong in the late game against this deck, where they've only got Zhongli left as their solo character. So if we can end our turn first and make sure to use our burst first on our next turn, then that should pretty much lock up the game in our favour. But even if we're wasting a couple of dice here and we had to spend some of them on our other cards, it's just super important to make sure we have the turn priority so that we can do this before our opponent can do it back to us. Right, so here we go.
I will have order.
Making sure we still have enough dice left to do 3 actions. And in this case, it is actually simply enough to get the win in just 2 normal attacks.
You shouldn't see me like...
Let's see how we can exploit some dice advantage in this clip. And we're playing here with Double Pyro Itto, which is very much a deck designed to exploit dice advantage, build up a lot of elemental dice for 1 key combo turn, usually turn 3, and then get a lot of value on that turn using Bennett's Burst and Itto's Burst. So what we're going to see just in the first few turns is making sure that we can't get punished, which in this case means taking too much damage on Itto or so much damage on Bennett that you can't safely burst. So we're taking some damage on Yoimiya and charging up some energy on Itto, and most importantly developing all these ramp cards, Paimon, Vanarana, Timmy should go off on turn 3, round 3 rather, and making sure we have as many dice as we can on that key turn. And we want to, you do need to for this combo deck, make sure we've got enough Pyro dice to use Bennett's Burst. And we actually looked at this combo deck as an example back in our video number 7 on understanding your game plan. So check that out if you want to know the deck about in more detail. But we're just charging up Bennett's Burst and making sure that we have as many dice as we can for turn 3 on our combo turn. And part of that we can play this parametric transformer to gain 3 extra dice when it goes off, which will be next turn. We don't want that to happen quite yet, so we didn't play at the start of the turn. And then even storing some dice with our Covenant of Rock, why not? In order to make sure if they're useful elements we have them straight away at the start next turn. And here we go, so going into turn number 3, how many dice have we been able to store with our dice advantage? Well, since we spent a lot of our actions last few turns charging up Bennett's Burst, opponent gets to start first here, and with only 5 dice left they shouldn't be able to interfere with Itto too much anymore. And look, now we're at 12 dice to 1 die, so we can safely take our actions, knowing opponent's not likely to do very much. So this is the point of having a dice advantage, and our opponents just ended their round, so seeing our cards in hand, seeing what we've got on the field, seeing our 10 dice, we can plan what we can do to eliminate our opponent's team. And in this case, it should be really straightforward. Opponent hasn't really applied any pressure at all. And we can just use all of the dice advantage we ramped up to deal damage in one turn. And I mean, if opponent had cards like Lotus Flower, Crisp, or other ways to interact, well, they're not getting a chance to use them since they already ended their turn. And that's what makes dice advantage so valuable. Overall, manipulating whether you go first or second in a round is a big deciding factor in many games of the TCG. You can do this by deliberate use of quickswap effects, and spending or storing your dice using certain cards, as playing cards doesn't use up your action for turn.